So let me summarize your keynote lecture for the upcoming Korean conference. 1 minute.
Yes, I'm going to argue that we need to fundamentally rethink work, leadership, and management. Over the last decades, many of us have become familiar with new business models. We understand how a new business model can change an industry, whether it's Tesla in the car industry or WeChat in China or Airbnb. But now we have to be able to think as radically about new management models as we think about new business models. I think the companies that win over the coming years will evolve their management models faster than their competitors in ways that make them more resilient, more innovative, and more inspiring places to work. This is going to take radical thinking and radical doing. There are some companies that are already on this path, but I think every company will have to abandon the old hierarchical, bureaucratic, top-down structures and move to organizations that are much more entrepreneurial, much more lateral instead of vertical, and much more empowering. And in my talk, I'll lay out that new model of organization, and I will outline the critical steps that any business has to take to make that migration.
Okay, very good. But to make lateral organizations, Korean companies Asian companies in general and Korean companies in particular has difficulties because of the Confucianism. You have visited Korea a lot, so how can overcome these cultural barriers?
I do think there are cultural differences when you look around the world. I remember one time being in Korea, I was talking to a large group there in one of Korea's leading companies, and my topic was innovation, and they had 400 people march into the auditorium in military formation. Yeah. And I'm supposed to talk about innovation. So I think, the good news is I see companies that have this new model all over the world. I worked for many years with Haier in China, the world's largest home appliance company that competes with LG and Samsung in the appliance industry. And they are not a typical Chinese company for sure. They only have two management layers. They divided this very large company into more than 4,000 micro enterprises. They use very sophisticated technology that allows all of these independent businesses to collaborate around new opportunities. So I know it's possible in every culture. I think the primary challenge is one of management and leadership. They have to be willing to give up their power. They have to recognize that in a world that is changing so fast and that's so dynamic, you cannot direct a company any longer from the top. Even strategy has to be created in a more open, bottom-up way. So the fundamental challenge in Korea, like every other country, is we need leaders who can shift their role from being managers to mentors and shift their focus from setting strategy to trying to build the systems and the processes that allow everyone to contribute and to innovate.
Right. You always emphasized there should be 4 layers or less than 10 or in Korea, right? Frankly speaking, there are more than 10 layers in ordinary organizations, even, So I fully.
But I would say Korea is not unique. Facebook now, Meta, has more than 10 management layers. This just happens almost automatically over time. Every leader wants to climb a ladder. They want to hire more subordinates. They want to grow their empire. So that kind of bureaucratic structure grows like a cancer unless you tackle it. So it's not unusual for organizations to have 8 or 9 or 10 layers. But what I will say is, I think it's impossible for an organization to change as fast as the world around it if you have 8 or 9 or 10 layers. Now, if you are trying to catch up with someone else, if you are imitating someone else, and you want to win by being a little bit cheaper or a little bit better, sometimes that's possible even in a fairly hierarchical organization, because you don't have to be that fast and that creative. But if you want to lead, I think it's almost impossible to lead over the long term if you have an organization that is so top heavy.
Right. Thank you very much. And next question is, we have suffered a lot for the last 3 years because of the COVID-19, and I'd like to know your opinion on the major, most important impact of this happening to our organizations and management in general, please.
So I would point to three things that really came out of COVID-19 in terms of business. The first was, I think many leaders were surprised at how quickly and effectively their teams responded to the crisis, even in the absence of top-down direction. In a small crisis, if you have a small problem, authority tends to move to the center. But when you have a real crisis, authority moves to the periphery because the center doesn't know what's going on. They can't move fast enough. So what you saw around the world, first in healthcare and then in other industries, was people on the front lines mobilizing, connecting, solving problems, using their initiative to keep us healthy and keep businesses running. I'm hoping that leaders took some lessons from that and understand that there was and is a lot of unused capacity in their people, a lot of initiative, a lot of ingenuity that came to the fore through this crisis. And leaders have to be careful that we don't revert now to these more bureaucratic, control-oriented management practices. So I would say that is number one. I think the second impact is that many people started to think more deeply about what they were getting out of their work. They had time at home. Some of them were laid off. They couldn't work for a period of time. And so they started to think more critically about the return on emotional investment that they get from their jobs. We called this the Great Resignation, if you like. And so, when you're on that hamster wheel, when you're running, you don't have much time to think about, is my job giving me more than just a paycheck? Is it allowing me to grow as a human being, to contribute and to learn? But COVID was kind of a timeout. It was an interruption where people started to think more deeply about those questions. And I think, as we've seen, the frustration with work has only gone up. And more people are now looking for jobs and looking to move somewhere else. I think the third thing that happened was obviously a shift to mobile working. I think that is being reversed to some extent in many organizations. They're requiring people to come back to work. But again, I think that's part of the trend of people really asking for, demanding more flexibility in their work lives. So for me, those are the big things that came out of COVID. It remains to be seen how long-lasting those effects will be. But it gives me some hope that employees will ask for more, that they will be more thoughtful about their jobs, and that the companies that respond to those frustrations and needs will be the ones that have a huge advantage in hiring the best talent.
So I understand Charles Handy's book, Elephant and Flea. This COVID impact great influence on making more fleas than elephant. Do you think?
I think that we've seen a long-term trend towards more startups, more entrepreneurship around the world. Now, that comes in waves. Right now, with a more difficult economic environment, the number of new IPOs is going down. The number of unicorns is falling around the world. But I think that trend will continue. It goes up and down through business cycles. We know that 70% of young people would like to work in their own business or in a small entrepreneurial business where they do have the freedom to grow, where they feel their contribution matters. So I think that is going to continue to grow. The dilemma, though, is the following, that in most economies, and this is true in Korea as well, if you look at those unicorns, if you look at the young companies that are starting to succeed, they comprise a very small share of the global economy or of the local economy. For example, in the US, in Europe, in China, their unicorns in those economies are worth less than 5% of the value of the 500 largest organizations. So entrepreneurship is very, very important. It's a way of holding these large companies to account and putting pressure on them to innovate. But large companies need to be every bit as innovative as small companies, because even though we see more and more entrepreneurship, we also see in every country, large economy, that the biggest companies are accounting for a greater and greater share of employment. So if the biggest companies in an economy are not resilient and creative and inspiring places to work, there are not going to be enough startups to make up the difference. So we need to build that entrepreneurial spirit in every organization, public and private, large and small, and not only look for it in the startups.
Okay, I understand. Thanks. And next question is, you are creator of the concept of core competence in various articles and books. And is core competence, how can you discover core competence, or can it be developed? Which way? Yeah, please.
So I think you both can look at your existing capabilities and you can start to ask which of those might be something we can build on and turn it into a real core competence. And that what competencies will we need for the future? So, my test of a core competence is quite demanding. First of all, it has to be something that's difficult to imitate. It's not just one technology or one skill. It's usually a bundle of skills and technologies. Number two, it has to make a significant contribution to perceived customer value. And number three, it needs to be a launch pad that you can use to move into other areas and into other sectors. So many companies, I would argue, probably don't even have a genuine core competence. They have a lot of capabilities where they're kind of mediocre, but where they really have a deep competence that's world-class, that's something you have to work at over time. There are some very good examples right now. Again, if you look at Tesla, they are building world-class competence in batteries, in autonomous vehicles, in all the software that's required to manage that. Those are really difficult skills and technologies to master. Over the last 12 years, Apple made a decision to build a core competence in chip design. Again, a very difficult skill to master. And now they are one of the leading designers of microprocessors, of systems on a chip, and they have proprietary silicon in every one of their devices. So whatever kind of organization you have, you need to be focused on building truly world-class capabilities in some area that will give you a chance to create real value for the customer and capture some of that value. Today, every business, every company competes in an ecosystem. No company can do it all by themselves, but your share of profit from that ecosystem, from that network, depends on how valuable and how rare is that competence or capability that you're bringing to that network. So I think that idea is probably as important now as it was more than maybe 30 years ago when I first wrote about it.
Right. So core competence in marketing terms, we call point of difference. So core competence in strategy corresponding to point of difference, POD, in marketing terminology. Is it okay to understand?
I think it can be the same thing, but often in marketing, I think there's a danger that we emphasize rather small or trivial differences. Many consumer products can really only be differentiated by advertising, right? Mm-hmm. By branding. And you want to go deeper than that. You want to find technology, or that could be product technology or process technology, or even deep knowledge of the customer. But you want to find capabilities that are very hard to imitate and are not things that are kind of superficial in terms of the value they create. So yes, a true core competence should give you a significant point of difference, but often what we talk about as, our value proposition or a unique product difference, we have to be sure those are not small and trivial, but are really deep and based on world-class skills and technologies.
Okay, thank you. The last question, Gary. So we are living in the era of perma crisis, like today. What is the first thing we should do to survive, and what is the most important thing in the longer term?
Well, that's a very good question. You're right that today, as a species, we face a broad array of unprecedented challenges. We're seeing the disintegration of the global economy. We're seeing more and more income inequality, great regional conflict, loss of trust in large institutions, declining productivity growth across most economies. So this change will test the resilience of every individual, every institution, and every society. And so today, I think the most important question you can ask is, are we changing as fast as the world around us? And so I think the most fundamental advantage as you look forward, I would call it an evolutionary advantage. This is not a competitive advantage at a point in time, but it's an evolutionary advantage over time. It's the ability to anticipate the future, to quickly reconfigure, reallocate resources, to be always on the offense and never on the defense, to have an organization that's hungry to invent and eager to change. And I think that's, as I said at the beginning, that's going to take a fundamental rethink of our large organizations. Our capacity as a species to tackle those challenges depends critically on the capacity of our institutions, right? No society is more capable than its institutions. And in Korea, you've had incredible companies that have driven your economy forward. Unfortunately, in Korea, your economy is way too much focused on a very small number of companies. You need dozens of large companies that are global champions. But I think we need to put the same energy into what I would call management or organizational innovation that we put into innovation in other areas, because the societies that win are going to have institutions that are daring, that are resilient, that are creative. And this is not just a matter for a few CEOs or managers. This is a challenge we have to take seriously in every society. That means rethinking the business school curriculum. It means creating incentives for companies to innovate around management as well as technology. It means the government stepping in and creating prizes and awards for companies that start to embrace these new management principles. It means learning from whoever around the world you think is building kind of post-bureaucratic organizations. So that, to me, from my perspective, is kind of the meta challenge. We have all these very specific challenges we can see, but our ability to deal with them is going to depend on creating institutions that are far more resilient and courageous than the ones we have on average right now.
Right, thank you very much. I understand evolutionary advantage is like a resilience, how quickly we adapt. So I think it's very much inspirational to me as well. So Gary, have you done your lecture yet, or?
No.
All right, so maybe the lecture is coming in 2 weeks' time. So
yes,
yeah,
I'm looking forward to it.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much for your time, and go to bed.
Okay.
Right.
Ciao, ciao. Bye-bye.
Ciao, ciao.